Let's get into the review, starting with the lens's specifications. The lens is a 50mm f1.4, and the lens filter side is 55mm, approximately 3.5 inches. In centimeters, that's about 17 centimeters. The lens weighs approximately 8.5 ounces. In metric, that's 240 grams, approximately. Let's talk about the applications for a 50mm lens. A 50mm lens is a great rocking around lens on a 4-frame camera. On an APS-C sensor or Macro Four Thirds, not so much. On APS-C, a 50mm is about a 60mm. And on Macro Four Thirds, it's about 70mm. On those smaller sensors, it's more like a dedicated portrait lens. But on 4-frame, it's great for portraits, landscapes, detailed shots, food photos, architecture, product photography, and with that fast maximum aperture, it's great at getting photos in low light. And with that fast maximum aperture, it's also capable of rendering you a very nice out of focus background and isolating your subject. If you're looking for one lens just to walk around town or out in the woods on adventure with, you really can't go wrong with a 50. Let's talk about the build quality. The lens is made out of metal with a rubber focusing ring. It does not have a rubber sealing gasket. The focusing ring is just perfection. You can turn it just using the tip of your finger. It's a beautiful motion. It only takes a thumb to move it. It's beautiful, it's smooth, and it's accurate. It's built like a tank, and it feels wonderful in the hand. You can see when the aperture is stopped down, the blades aren't perfectly round anymore. Let's start with the low light test. Most lenses will perform well in hard contrasting light, but we're not always going to be shooting in that kind of light, especially if we want good photos, and especially if we have the lens as bright as f1.4. Let's get into the test. Moving to look in the center of the image at f1.4, we see reasonable sharpness in the center of the image. Contrast is low. Let's have a look at those corners. The corners don't look too bad. They're very dark in the corners due to vignetting, but they look decent. Moving on to f2. Let's have a look in the center of the image. Moving into the center of the image, we see a boost in contrast and sharpness. This stopped down to f2. Excellent. Let's have a look at those corners. Those corners also look good. It's only the very extreme corners that still look a little soft. Excellent. Moving on to f2.8. Moving into the center of the image, we see other jump in sharpness and contrast. Excellent. How about those corners? Those corners also look pretty good. Excellent. Now moving on to f4. Moving to look in the center of the image. Things look pretty good. I think the lens is at peak sharpness in the center of the image. Excellent. Let's have a look at those corners. Those corners also look good. Excellent. Moving on to f5.6. Moving into the center of the image. Things look pretty good. I'm not really seeing much of a difference between f4 and f5.6. Let's have a look at those corners, shall we? Those corners also look pretty good. Excellent. And moving to the center of the image at f16. Surprisingly, things stay about the same. Sharpness rise even stopped over there at f16. Excellent. How about those corners? Again, fantastic. Hats off to those Minolta engineers. This is a great result. Moving on to the highlight test. At f1.4, moving into the center of the image. We see good sharpness, but average contrast. How about those corners? Corners look pretty good. Pretty much the same as the center. Moving on to f2. See a strong boost in contrast and sharpness. This stopped down to f2. This is an excellent result. Let's have a look at those corners. Those corners also look pretty good. And as you can see, the vignetting has actually improved this stop down to f2. Excellent. Now moving on to f2.8. Let's have a look at the center of the image. Well, at f2.8, in the center of the image quality is this perfect. Perfect contrast. It's razor sharp. How about a look at those corners? Those corners look fantastic, and the vignetting looks like it's gone. Fantastic. Moving on to f4. Let's have a look in the center of the image. Well, I don't see much of an improvement between f2 and f4. Maybe a slight improvement. Things look fantastic. Let's have a look at those corners. The corners also look fantastic, just like the center of the image. Even stop down the f16, as you can see moving into the center of the image. It stays that sharp as it was at f4. This is fantastic. Hats off to the Minolta engineers. Let's have a look at those corners. The corners even look fantastic at f16. Excellent. Let's take a look at this lens's flaring characteristics. As you can see, in a bright light first enters the frame, we do lose a lot of contrast, and we do see flaring. The flaring is mild, but it is extremely apparent. The lack of contrast when bright lights into the frame is the real concern to me. But this is a rather average performance for a vintage 50mm lens. Let's take a look at this lens's sun stars. As you can see, its sun star performance is pretty good. Moving on to the bokeh test. This is an extreme bokeh test. Ordinarily, you wouldn't be really shooting like this. I picked a complicated background to basically put the lens through its paces. As you can see, for the most part, it does render a smooth background. You do notice some weird stuff on hard edges, but overall it's very soft. We are noticing a little bit of cat's eyeing on the bokeh, but not bad. This is pretty good. One more note on the bokeh. Due to the aperture blades not being perfectly round as you stop down, you will get hacks on the bokeh balls. This is something to keep in mind. Moving on to the vignetting test. Even at f16, the vignetting really never goes away. We are seeing some minor barrel distortion as well. Not a bad result. This is kind of normal for a vintage 50. Overall, this lens comes highly recommended. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you wish to support me, you can support me on Redbubble, Society6, and Adobe Stock. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Behance. And don't forget to like and subscribe.